Okami is, in my opinion, a masterpiece. It is by far one of the most unique games that I've ever played, almost on every front. Whether it be the art style, the story or the gameplay, there aren't many games out there like Okami, and it means that the game has aged beautifully, especially if, like me, you played the HD version of the game. Now Okami is based on Japanese folklore. The game begins with a short story detailing how a white wolf called Shiranui teamed up with the swordsman Nagi to defeat and then seal the 8-headed demon Orochi. 100 years later, in the present day of the game, some plonker comes along and accidentally frees Orochi, plunging Nippon into darkness. To combat this, a wood sprite Sakuya, who is also the guardian of Okami village, the place where the swordsman Nagi lived, summons Amaterasu, who takes the form of a reincarnated Shiranui. Amaterasu, alongside Issun, a guy who's an inch tall, goes on a journey to defeat Orochi and return Nippon to normal. And that's all you really need to know about this game's story. The story is more complicated than what I've detailed here and goes in some surprising and interesting directions, but I think it's best that you discover those directions for yourself. As engaging and interesting as the story is, nothing caught my attention more than this game's gameplay. Yes, there is the generic press the square button and the triangle button to attack, and you can also evade attacks from enemies. Whilst there's nothing too special about these attacks, I do like that the game allows you to have both a primary and secondary weapon. All the weapons in this game, of which there aren't that many, can be equipped as either your primary or secondary weapon. Depending on which slot you put them in, changes how they are utilised. So for example, there are 3 weapon types. There's a disc-like weapon that you start with, which when equipped in the primary weapon slot attacks like normal, but when you put it in the secondary weapon slot, it instead acts like a shield. There's also a bead-like weapon. When put in the main weapon slot, it acts like a whip, where each individual bead counts as a hit on the enemy, but when put in the sub-weapon slot, it acts like a gun, where you shoot beads at your enemies. Lastly, there is a sword weapon. Put this bad boy in the main weapon slot and Amaterasu will swing the sword around, but put it in the sub-weapon slot and the sword will lock onto your enemy and send you hurtling towards them. I like that there are multiple combinations that you can utilise in this game, and does provide some freedom for the player in how they wish to play the game. For my own personal setup, I had a bead weapon as my main so that I can whip the enemies, and a sword as my secondary so that I could occasionally do major damage to some of the enemies. To clarify, pressing the square button attacks with the main weapon, and the triangle button attacks with the sub-weapons. It's very simple and would get old very fast if not for the mechanic that sets this game apart from everything else that I've played. In this game, there are celestial brush techniques. In fact, the 13 celestial brush techniques are the reason that the pint-sized Issun follows you around. This is because he is a painter and wishes to improve his ability. But anyway, the brush techniques really open up this game's gameplay, and not just in battle. You'll use them throughout the game as you explore the world, whether it be to get to a new area or to help you reach a collectible. At the press of a button, the game will freeze and turn a sort of brownish, at which point a brush will appear on screen. You can use this brush to then draw certain shapes that will result in an effect on the world around you. This really allows you to get creative in combat. You can blind enemies during battle by splashing ink on them, allowing you to get some hits in. You can slash an enemy with your brush to do major damage and finish them off. The slash attack is also a great way to send flying enemies crashing to the ground by clipping their wings, and it is a good way of destroying enemy shields. You can both use the brush to set enemies on fire and electrocute them. You can send enemies flying with a wind attack. Best of all, you can draw a bomb out of thin air. The bomb is, from what I found, to be the most powerful and useful of all the brush techniques. If it hits, it does massive damage. In so many of the enemy encounters in this game, I would just spam the bomb attack until there was nothing left of the enemy. And in the boss battles, I would often default to just throwing out as many bombs as I could, whenever I could. Speaking of the boss battles, whilst I wouldn't say that this game has the best boss battles I've ever played, I would say that this game does have some good boss battles. Best of all, they all could only work in this game as each boss battle takes advantage of the player using a different brush technique. The 2 standout boss battles in this game for me were the spider boss battles and the boss battle against Lechku and Nechku. Fighting those 2 owls is genuinely one of my favourite bosses in gaming. It takes full advantage of Okami's game mechanics and allows you to fight alongside an NPC character. An NPC character who's actually extremely useful in the fight. Some games either have a good story or good gameplay. In my opinion, Okami was endowed with both. Although again, I'm not spoiling why I think the story was so good. It's not just the combat that I love about this game, but the level design and the semi-open worldness of this game. Okami is open world like the old Assassin's Creed games were. You have a small area that you can explore. There's side content around like looking for collectibles and doing odd jobs for certain characters, but there's also characters that you need to talk to progress the story. Then when a character tells you that you need to get to another area, you then run to the edge of the map where you then get transported to another open area with its own side content and collectibles. Okami isn't the first game to do this, but going through a game like this again reinforced my preference for a game like this over the current type of open world game. Now in fairness, some open world games are great. I love Red Dead Redemption 2 and its ability to surprise you no matter where you are in the world. And Spider-Man is a game that should be open world regardless of how middling its side content generally is, because traversing the game as Spider-Man is just as integral to the experience as beating up bad guys as Spider-Man. However, a lot of open world games are criticised for being surface level, as in on the surface they are beautiful, but look any deeper and you'll find a world with nothing to offer. I much prefer Okami's approach of smaller open areas where I don't spend over half the game running through an empty field just so I can get to a trailing mission. Whilst there are games with more diversity, I do like that there is some variance in the areas that you travel through in this game. You have the grassy open area of Shinshu Field, you have the lush forest of Agata, you have the seaside locale of North Hiroshima Coast, and the somehow lava-soaked floors of Himiko's Palace. Then there's the city structure of Seion, and the snowy vistas of Wepkir. And last but not least, there's the futuristic setting of the Arc of Yamato. This game takes you to many places, and weirdly, none of them feel too out of place despite how different they can be. Honestly, outside of Himiko's Palace having lava floors, the only time the location seemed strange to me was when I went to this one area and the walls were covered in penises. I'm not kidding, I took pictures, I'm not sure why, but the walls and floors in this one specific area were covered in penises. There were a bunch of kids around, so maybe they drew them. I know I did a lot when I was a kid, but even so, I did not expect to see them on my journey in Okami. Gave me a good laugh though. Like the boss fights in this game, there was one area that really stuck out to me in this game, and it's the level where Amaterasu gets shrunken down and has to travel through this one specific level whilst the size of a pea. It also allows you to get a good look at Issun, who is the same size as you, and create some new environmental hazards courtesy of some freaky looking spiders. Best of all, it culminates in you jumping down the throat of an emperor so that you can fight a virus/curse inside of him. It's clearly not just the combat where the developers got creative. One of the parts of this game that consistently surprises people is its length. No joke, once you've beat this game, you've defeated the great evil, all the major character arcs have been wrapped up, there's a celebratory epilogue, everything's done and dusted, the screen fades to black. Then BAM! End of part 1. I mean, the game doesn't do this, but it really could have and it wouldn't have felt out of place. Okami reaches its narrative conclusion and then just carries on. In a lot of ways, it feels like you're playing Okami trilogy all in one game. You definitely get bang for your buck with this game. The best part about the fact that Okami continues after where you think it's going to finish is that it doesn't feel forced. This game never outstays its welcome and never feels like it's dragging its feet. The developers had a lot they wanted to say with Okami and all of it feels worthwhile. Even crazier is that when the game actually does end, it ends on a sequel hook. Whilst that sequel may never come, I hope it does and its developers seem to hope so too, the ending definitely left me curious of where the story was going to go next, as there were a lot of possibilities. And if you are concerned, don't worry, Okami does wrap up its story. The ending isn't a cliffhanger or a to be continued. The game wraps up all but one thing, and that one thing isn't something that needs to be wrapped up, but like I said, I would love for it to be in a sequel. So if you were going into this game expecting a short but sweet game from the past, then you will be in for a hopefully nice surprise. This game has aged really well, although there were a couple moments that stuck out to me as the game showing its age. Fortunately, none are major moments that will impede on your gaming experience. For example, at one point in this game, you need to feed a bunch of dogs so that they will help you out. Now in the game, there is a feed button that you can press whenever you come across animals out and about in the world. However, for some reason, when it comes to these dogs which you actually do need to feed so that you can progress the story, there is no feed button. Instead, what you have to do is go into your inventory and select the food there so that you can feed them. It's a weird mechanic considering there's usually a button to actually feed animals, just not when you genuinely need to. It's a minor issue, but it is a failure in the game design, and it's one of those moments that could lead to a player running around the area, not sure what they actually need to do. However, despite being a little rough around the edges, this game has aged remarkably in the gameplay department, and even now still stands out amongst the crowd. Whilst I haven't spoke about this game's story, for the most part, let's be real, I've dropped a few hints and reveals here and there in this video, I can talk in detail about this game's wonderful cast of characters. Why is Sakuya's ass on show? For some reason, Sakuya is wearing the skimpiest outfit in the entire game and no one bats an eye on it. There's literally nothing left to the imagination when it comes to Sakuya. I'm trying to follow the dialogue in this game and her arse is just hovering in my eyeline. At least this game doesn't make it any weirder by showing Sakuya as a child. Oh, okay. Maybe they do. Anyway, we're here to talk about the good characters in the game. Firstly, there's Amaterasu, the wolf that you play as. I don't really have much to say other than they are a wolf with godly powers. That's basically the character. I mean, there is some personality to Amaterasu, but it's a wolf that acts like a wolf. I don't know what to tell you. I'd be interested in hearing people's opinions on Issun. Characters don't talk properly in this game. Instead of actual dialogue, it's just gibberish, like a bunch of grunts and mumbles. I think if Issun actually spoke words instead of talking gobbledygook throughout the game, then I think that he could have been annoying. Like that companion in games that just won't stop talking. Since he isn't able to form actual words, I actually ended up liking him. His character arc doesn't become clear until much later in the game, but to sum it up, he's basically a very immature and kind of rude person. He's shirked his responsibilities and this game is basically about him maturing and becoming a better individual. He's not my favourite character in the game, but I never hated having him around. Plus, considering Amaterasu is a wolf, you do need someone who can actually converse with the other characters. Otherwise, it would just be a lot of standing around. Susano is a real standout in the character department in my opinion. He's the descendant of Nagi, the hero that helped Shiranui defeat Orochi nearly 100 years ago. Susano is no Nagi. He's very lazy and seems to actually hate his bloodline, believing that he can't live up to those that came before him. He's also a coward, the complete opposite of his well-respected ancestor. On top of this, he's very selfish. I'm not really painting a positive picture of Susano, but I'm sure you'll love him, because a lot of the comedy in this game comes from his character and the situations he falls into. I've not really spoken about the tone of this game. Like a lot of Japanese properties, this game fluctuates between silly and serious, and Okami is able to walk this tightrope very well. There are some truly daft moments in this game, but there are also some moments where the game refuses to pull its punches. I'm talking character deaths. I'm not going to say any more than that, but I think Susano really reflects the tone of the game. There are moments where the game invites you to laugh at him, and there are moments where the game wants you to take him seriously. Like Issun, Susano needs to find himself in this game, and whilst he'll make you chuckle every now and then, you will in the end root for Susano to live up to his true potential. And then you have a character like Waka, who is never serious. Waka is another standout for the characters, showing up sporadically every now and then to give you some of his wisdom, whether you want it or not. Whilst Waka could have been one note, his character becomes interesting as there is a lot of mystery surrounding him. His origins, his allegiances. I spent the entire game unsure of whether or not Waka was an ally. I hoped that he would be revealed as a good guy in the end, but I wouldn't have been surprised to see him revealed as the big bad pulling the strings. I'm not going to reveal which way Waka leans, but he always injected the screen with a lot of energy anytime he showed up. The final character I'm going to talk about is Oki, who shows up late in the game. Oki kind of reminds me of a more heroic version of Susano. He's selfish and his judgment is clouded, but he only does his selfish acts because he believes that they'll lead to a better outcome for everyone. Essentially, he's allowed his mind to become clouded, but at no point are you worried that he'll do the wrong thing. Again, keeping with the theme of self-discovery, Oki just needs to find himself. He's a good man who has allowed himself to walk down the wrong path. These aren't the only good characters in Okami, but they are the standouts in my opinion. Before we wrap up here, let's talk about the most striking thing about Okami and the aspect that has aged the best about this game. Its aesthetic. Okami has one of my favourite art styles that I've ever come across in a game. The cel shaded aesthetic is one of the reasons why I think this game still holds up visually today. Kinda like how I think the Borderlands games still look good today, even though you can tell that those games have aged a little visually. I love how the characters and world look in this game. It fits so well with this game's story. In Okami, you use the celestial brush to draw things into the world. I like that the cel shaded aesthetic of Okami makes it look like everything from the characters to the world has been drawn into existence. Basically, the game looks cool, and there's an actually fitting reason for it to look this way. I like that when you run around you can actually see the names of the other areas floating in the sky, guiding you to that area. I love the character designs in this game and I absolutely adore the enemy designs. Every enemy in this game looks distinct and different to the other, and the way an enemy is designed informs how they move and fight. Obviously if an enemy has wings they can fly, but enemies that look like wheels will move incredibly fast and will circle the fighting arena. Enemies that have drums will use them like bazookas. The enemies all look cool and each time a new enemy is introduced, it's exciting because you have no idea how they are going to play. There was one enemy that I did find annoying though, and that was the Blockheads. The Blockheads unsurprisingly block your path, and to beat them you need to hit their weak points, which will briefly flash on screen. However, if you are off by even a millimeter, then you fail to beat them and you have to try again. This was so tedious, especially later in the game when the Blockheads have far too many weak points for you to ever remember. Literally, the only way I beat the ultimate Blockhead was to cheat and record the moments that all the weak points flashed on screen. I feel no regret or remorse over my actions. It's so satisfying watching them explode like that. Okami is an incredible game. It has a wonderfully imaginative story, inventive gameplay, fun and wacky characters, interesting enemy design, and a good soundtrack to boot. Whilst I genuinely doubt we'll ever get a sequel to Okami, I'd love to be wrong, although the game did get a spiritual successor called Okamiden, which was released on the Nintendo DS. So there is that if you want to try and satiate your Okami fix. Everything about Okami is good, and it's a game that still holds up today, and I believe it will hold up for many more years. That's why I believe that Okami is a timeless masterpiece. If you enjoyed this video, then please do leave a like and a comment. What did you think of Okami? Have you played any games that remind you of Okami? Who is your favourite character in Okami and why? And also, what was your favourite boss? Was there anything about this game that you didn't like? Be sure to let me know in the comments, and if you really enjoyed this video, then do consider subscribing please. I'm aiming to hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I really think we have a shot at hitting that goal. With that said, thank you for watching this video, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.